the lecture. Inshallah. May Allah accept as a matter of ibadah.
Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulil karim wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Allahumma qaddimna ma yanfa'una wa fa'alna bima 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. ما شاء الله لا قوة إلا بالله ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله لا إله إلا الله قبل كل شيء ولا إله إلا الله بعد كل شيء لا إله إلا الله يبقى ربنا ويفنى كل شيء لا إله إلا الله ورب العرش العظيم الحمد لله رب العالمين. Give thanks to Almighty Allah. We ask for Allah's mercies and blessings upon the noble Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his household and his companions, and all of the believers from this day to the day of judgment. Ameen. So I thank our Sheikh, Sheikh Abdul Alugo, for leading us through the Azkar. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our supplications. And Sheikh Imran Bisiolu, for leading us through the Azkar. We ask Allah to accept our supplications, accept our prayers, and grant us our heart desires in this life, and grant us His paradise on the day of judgment. Ameen. Now, we also pray for all of our teachers. We pray for our Imam. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be with him and grant him all of his heart desires and grant him goodness in this life and in the hereafter. Amin ya Allah. Today, inshallah, we will be having a contemporary discussion. We'll be having a discussion about a contemporary topic, a very controversial one, but one which is important nevertheless. Because we're in a society and we're in a world today where it is important for us to have some information about our religion. And our lack of such information can have effects on how, most times we're put on the defensive by people who are not a part of this religion, or even some people who are a part of this religion. But we have some nagging questions that we need to answer. Sometimes we don't know how to ask those questions for fear of being seen in a way, in a paranoid way, or for people to see one as an ignoramus. We avoid asking such questions, but they're important because people use these things against Islam. And in our own bid to defend Islam without knowledge or knowing the proper way to answer these questions, we complicate the issues further. Also, in a society where today our children are growing up and they're going to have such questions, so they will have people asking them such questions, and they might be in a position to want to defend or answer such questions, and an inability to answer such questions might make them think maybe Islam is not truly the way, maybe Islam is really not good, it's not a good religion. This topic is about child marriage and the Islamic view on it. What is this Islamic view on child marriage, male and female? We've heard people call a noble prophet a pedophile. They would say he married a young girl, he married a girl child, and today because marrying a girl child is not acceptable, they will place it on the prophet to say Islam encourages people to marry girl child and take away their rights and things like that. But as Muslims, the way to approach this kind of matter, and there are a lot of them, where people pick and choose, and then they want to use it as an argument against Islam. So the best way to engage such topic is with information. And usually when you have enough information, sometimes you don't engage because there's no need to engage. And sometimes when you engage and you come from that position of authority and knowledge, they will, accept that knowledge from you. And so it's important that we ask these questions that we discuss this kind of topic amongst ourselves and we get the right information about it. So to begin, I'd like to mention that for the most part, a lot of things, the world was already in existence before Islam came and before rules of Islam came. Islam came and it did three things as far as regards the things that it met on ground. For some of the practices that Islam met on ground, some of them, Islam did not say anything about it. They are practicing it, it is traditional, it can be regional, it can even be practiced worldwide. Islam came and did not mention anything about it. Those kind of things, people will just continue to do it. until and if Allah says something, or the society itself decides on how to rule themselves about such topics. In the second sense, there are some things that Islam met people doing, practices or traditions or culture of people worldwide, not just Arabic culture, because most of the cultures practiced by the Arabs were also practiced in other parts of the world. Because Saudi Arabia at that time was a place where people made pilgrimage to pre-Islam. People would make pilgrimage to Islam and they bring their culture along too. So some of the things that they practiced in Saudi Arabia at that time was also things that they learned from other people. So when Islam came, there are some cultures and traditions and practices that it forbade. And it would be like, okay, so you have been doing this before. Now, since this time of Islam, we'll call the time before Islam the Jahiliyyah time. These are the things that you did before Islam, and now don't do it again. It is now forbidden upon you. Like naming the child in any way that you like burying a girl child. You know, when people are ashamed, if they give birth to a girl, they will bury the girl child alive with hope that if they bury it alive, it won't come back again because they have to bear male children. That is a show of strength. It's a show of weakness we want to bear a girl child. So such practices, Islam came and frowned upon it and forbade it. Don't bury your children alive for any reason. Maybe you're ashamed of what your peers will say, or even out of poverty. You're afraid of poverty, and because of that, you're killing your children. Don't do that again. Things like that. And also something like drinking of alcohol. Islam came and put restriction to that. You know, in the beginning, that was something that people were doing, and it was normal. Society accepted it. There was no rule against it before that time. Islam came, and at the end of the day, forbade it for believers. And then, in the third sense, there are some practices and traditions and cultures that Islam came, met them doing, did not say stop it, did not keep quiet about it, just had some ideas about it or put some restrictions to it. To say, okay, you're doing this thing, what you're doing is fine, but it's excessive. Don't do it this way, now do it this way. You have a limit of doing it. An example of that is marry more than one wife. That was a practice pre-Islam. So people say these things today as if Islam came and said people should marry more than one wife. No, marry more than one wife was cultural. For all around the world, who were marrying 10, 11, 12, they were having concubines and they were doing it excessively. And there was no one making sure that they were being fair amongst all those wives. Islam came, he put a restriction to it that the maximum you can have is 4, and you can only have more than 1 if and only if you can be just amongst them. There was no such restriction before Islam. So Islam came and put a restriction to it to ensure there's justice and there's fairness and everybody is fine. Another thing is that one of the most fundamental underlings of Sharia, that is the Islamic law, is fairness, and also making sure that nobody is hurt. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. So the Sharia is the rule of Allah, and its content is gained from the Quran. So if Allah has said in the Quran that we will not put a burden on anyone that they cannot handle, it means that no burden should come onto anyone from this rule or from the rule of Allah. That no burden can come on anyone. So the Sharia will seek to check everywhere that people are now being burdened more than what they can handle. And also there's this concept of the Sharia that is fundamental to it, which is la darar wa la dirar. This is a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that no discomfort should come to anyone. From any rulings that you give, you cannot discomfort anyone else. So you can't marry more than one wife and then discomfort them and cause them harm. That being said, one of the other practices again that, or traditions that Islam met, it is not Islam that came and said, marry girl children. It was an existing practice. Islam had a say on it. Islam put a restriction on it to help and make sure that the rights of those girl children are protected. Now, on this matter, there are 3 opinions. I'd like us to, it's a controversial topic, like I said, and it's going to be a discussion, inshallah. So there are 3 opinions of scholars on this matter. The first set of people said that it is allowed, that Islam allows a girl child or a boy child to be married at a young age. The second view says Islam only allows the girl child to be married at a young age, not a boy child. The third view says Islam does not allow children to be married at all. Now, all three of them have their points, and all three of them have their reasons and their proofs. So we're going to present the proofs given by all three of them, and inshallah, we will have a discussion about which is more viable for us. To begin, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Baqarah, when Allah was making a ruling about divorce, when a man would divorce a wife. Again, divorce, just to be clear, divorce was also a practice pre-Islam. It was also a pre-Islamic practice. And the way that if you learn about the way people were getting divorced before Islam, you will appreciate that Islam mentioned divorce. Because the mention of divorce in the Quran is a way of putting checks and balances in the way that people were divorcing one another, in protecting the right of both parties in the divorce. Before then, the man can just tell the wife, I've divorced you, and that's all. Can just tell his wife, you know what, the way I'm looking at you now, you don't look like a wife to me anymore. Now I see you as the backside of my mother. Now he has divorced her, but she is not free to marry anyone else. So men would use that to punish women. So we'll keep her in the house. If he says those words, just those mere words, saying, you look like the backside of my mother, he has divorced her, but she is not free to marry anyone else. That's a punishment for her. So what did Islam do? Islam came, abolished those kind of practices, and gave rulings on how divorce can be done for both male and female. If you're going to divorce someone, you don't just say, I divorce you. You can, if you say I divorce you, that's not everything. That's not the end of it. You have to still, they have to be with you for 3 months and all that. So the first verse that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed for this was in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 228, when Allah said, وَالْمُطَلَّقَاتِ يَتَرَبَّصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ ثَلَاثَةَ قُرُوءٍ. That the one that is being divorced, that is the woman that is being divorced, Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 228, that the woman that is being divorced, يَتَرَبَّصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ ثَلَاثَةَ قُرُوءٍ, will stay, will be expectant, will await 3 cycles. That is, she's going to stay with the man that has divorced her for 3 cycles, that is for 3 months. So she will stay with him and he will continue to be responsible for her. But he won't have any right to go close to her and have intercourse around that time. But what the Quran mentioned here were women, actual women, grown-up women. When this verse was revealed, the companions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they went to the Prophet and they said, Allah has revealed this verse and it has talked about women. What about the young ones? And what about the older women who are no longer, who don't have cycles anymore? What about the young ones who don't have cycles at all? What about the older ones who don't have cycles anymore, that is, who have reached menopause? And what about women who are currently pregnant at the time of divorce? We don't have any ruling for those yet. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam Surah An-Nisa, no, Surah Al-Talaq, verse 5. Surah Al-Talaq, verse 5. Now, what we're saying now is what the argument of those who say, or the scholars who agree with the child marriage in Islam. This is their argument. That a child can get married, boy or girl, before they grow, before they are of mature age. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Talaq verse 5 said, وَاللَّائِي يَئِسْنَ مِنَ الْمَحِيدِ مِن نِسَائِكُمْ, and of your wives, of your women, those who have reached menopause, or those who have ceased their cycle. In irtabutum, if you are not sure, that is, they're not sure about their cycle, whether it's still coming or not coming. So they have reached menopause. ثَلَاثَةَ أَشْهُرٍ وَاللَّهِ لَمْ يَئِدْنَ. That for such people who have reached menopause, after divorce, they will stay for 3 months in that house, in the orphan's house, in the house of the one that has divorced them. وَاللَّهِ لَمْ يَحِدْنَ, and the one that has not started the blood flow at all, the cycle at all. So the scholars say that if Allah mentioned in a divorce decree, Allah has mentioned someone who has reached menopause, and Allah has mentioned someone who has not started the cycle at all. There cannot be a divorce if there wasn't a marriage, right? If there cannot be a divorce if there wasn't a marriage, it means at that time, children, girls who were not yet of menstrual age or puberty were already getting married. Notice how this verse or the Quran, in fact, you won't even have it anywhere where it encourages intercourse. It doesn't mention intercourse, it mentions marriage and divorce, because we seem to mix both of them up. If it says children can get married, it doesn't say the children should have intercourse. So we're going to clarify that also. So again, this is the argument of scholars that say it is permissible in Islam to marry children, or that children should be married off. Wallahi lam yahidna, the Quran mentions children who have not started a menstrual cycle at all. Now, of the scholars who agreed to this argument, there are lots of scholars, but basically all of the 4 schools of thoughts of the Ai-Imma that we're used to, all 4 of them agree to this, that it is permissible in Islam, that child marriage, male or female, is permissible in Islam. However, they have some points of disagreement in terms of the modalities of it. How do you go about it? There are a lot of things that are involved in a marriage generally, but in a child marriage, there are also other things that are involved, like who is going to give the child out in marriage? Because clearly there's a ruling that says that for a child that is not up to age, that child's permission has to be sought before they can be married off. But for a child, a yatima, not that which is not of age, a yatima who is not of age, the one that has lost her father, who's not of age, they have to seek a permission to give her out in marriage. But the one that has a father alive, and this is where the school of thoughts disagree, who is going to give, okay, so let's say a child can be married. Who has the ability to marry off a girl child? This question will come back to, inshallah. Now, as part of the proof for those who agree that girl child marriage is permissible in Islam, number 1 of that is that this verse that we just recited, Surah Al-Talaq, verse 5, where Allah mentioned girls, in a decree for divorce, Allah mentioned girls who have not started their cycle. And number 2 is in Surah An-Nur, where Allah said, and marry those fanki'ul ayama minkum, and marry those who are single amongst you. Marry those who are single amongst you, male and female. Single, have never been married. And the scholars say, Allah says single. It doesn't have any age restrictions to it. It doesn't say they have to be of certain age and all that. So it covers all men and women. That is, boys and girls, everyone. Because all of them are covered. They are marriable based on this verse that says, "Fanki'ul ayama min nisaikum." Fanki'ul ayama minkum, and marry those who are single amongst you. Number 3 of the reasons that they gave is also the hadith of Aisha radiyallahu anha, where she said, "Tazawwajani nabiyyu wa anna ibnatu sitti wa bunayya And he consummated with me when I was 9 years old. He consummated with me when I was 9 years old. So this was done by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Prophet, as we all know, he wouldn't do it if it wasn't sanctioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is another proof that this is permissible in Islam. Another proof that they give is that some of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam also practiced this after the demise of the Prophet himself sallallahu alaihi wasallam. For example, it is reported that Ali radiallahu anhu married his daughter whose name is Kulthum. He married her to Umar ibn al-Khattab, another of the Prophet's companions. This is an act between two companions. Ali, a companion of the Prophet, married his young daughter to Umar ibn al-Khattab, who is another companion of the Prophet. And at the time that this was done, all the other companions of the Prophet, no one challenged or objected to this practice at that time. If there was anything wrong with it, or if the Prophet had said something about it to prohibit it for anyone, then when Ali gave his daughter to Umar ibn al-Khattab, some people, at least one person, would have objected, but there's no record of such. There were also other predecessors of the Prophet who engaged in this act of giving their child off in marriage while they are still young. Finally, the reason that they gave again to say that this is permissible in Islam is to say that, well, this is not a reason, this is like a restriction to it, and say this can be done, this is a practice that, see it as you may, it can portend some benefits for the girl child or the boy child at the time of marriage. Such benefit might not be able to be delayed until they grow up. Such benefit might not be able to be delayed until they grow up. I'm not sure I can think of any immediate kind of such benefit. It could be to avert a war, between two clans. And this is a practice that was not uncommon at that time, right? So it could be to avert the war at that time, to join two families together and avert the war, or to ensure the continuity of the wealth of the family or something like that. It could be for such noble reasons that cannot wait until the girl child or the boy child grow up. So it has to be a pressing need that requires them to do it immediately and at that time without waiting for them to grow up. These are the reasons or the arguments of those who say that this is permissible. And finally, one major restriction that they give to it, like I said, all the 5 mazahibs agree on this, and they only disagree on who can give the child out. But they also will agree on the fact that the father of the child has the permission, has the ability to give the child out in marriage. The reason for this, and it's very important, the reason that they agree that the father of the child can give the child out in marriage is because it is expected that the father of the child has the best interest of the child at heart. Remember how we have said it has to be that there's a pressing need that requires them to marry up that child at that time, and that need or that opportunity might be lost if they wait till the child grows up to marry her off or to marry him off to the family they are marrying off. So it is expected that only the father can make such decision in the best interest of that child, male or female. That decision has to be made. It has to be in the best interest of the child. It has to be that interest or the benefits in it for that child will be lost if they don't do it right now, if they have to wait for her or him to grow older before they do it. Again, they agree that the father has the sole responsibility or the sole right to give the child out in marriage to a person. And then you put a condition there for the father, that the only person the father can marry his child to has to be al-kafu, someone who is capable, who is seen as capable, who has been adjudged as capable emotionally, physically, financially, and every other way to take care of that person that they're marrying them off to. The father is given the responsibility or the allowance to marry off the child, but he also has the responsibility to make sure that the person is marrying off the child to is someone who is extremely capable to handle such girl child and take care of them and protect their interests. Having said that, the second argument says that only the girl child can be married off at a young age. The boy child cannot be married off at a young age. And even if it is done, that such is annulled, it is void, that it cannot stand. The scholar that says this one is Ibn al-Azm. His own argument is the fact that a boy child, when he grows up, when he's of age, it does not need a wali. A boy child does not need permission to get married when he's old enough. So if you marry him off by force, or if you use the power of the father over him when he's younger and doesn't have a say, when he grows up, he can annul that marriage. So why put him in that kind of precarious situation when he grows up and he has the power to divorce that wife and treat her badly? He can begin using such power. So don't do that to a boy child. Let him grow up and choose for himself. But for a girl child, because even if she is grown, the father still has to give her out. And the father will still give her out at that time with her best interest at heart. So he can also give her out now. Also, most of the scholars who agreed that this can be done all stand on the fact that it was done by predecessors, that they are not misinterpreting the Quran, the fact that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ engaged in this practice, and the fact that the Sahaba, after the Prophet engaged in this practice, that this is proof enough that this is acceptable and the Quran is not being misinterpreted. Now, the third argument says that this is not allowed at all. That this practice, that Islam does not permit this. They do not accept the explanation of the other scholars, the verse that they presented and the reasons that they presented. They make a strong argument. They have their own verse, Surah An-Nisa, verse 6. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was talking about the orphan girl, the female orphan. And Allah says that وَابْتَلُوا الْيَتَامَى حَتَّى إِذَا بَلَغُوا النِّكَاحَ وَابْتَلُوا الْيَتَامَى حَتَّى إِذَا بَلَغُوا النِّكَاحَ. Surah An-Nisa, verse 6. Allah is talking about the orphan child, and the orphan, again, like we said, is one that has lost their father. And the orphan, one who is termed as an orphan, is one who has lost their parents at an age before their first wet dream. So we have people, especially in our society, when we hear that you have to treat orphans right, take care of them, rub their head, and make sure that you're kind to them. You see old people, grown-up people saying, gbogbo àwọn privilege tó wà kúrò sí ọmọ òrukàn wà kúrò ságbàlagbà mọ́. Ìjọ́ wo lọmọ ti wá bàlágà in terms of ìjẹ́ ọmọ òrukàn àbí àìjẹ́ ọmọ òrukàn. Òun náà ni ìjọ́ tí ó bá ti kọ́kọ́ ní wet dream àkọ́kọ́, ó ti bàlágà nìyẹn. Kò í ṣọmọ òrukàn wọn, kò ní claim ọmọ òrukàn kankan mọ́ ńgbà náà. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah An-Nisa verse 6 says, وَابْتَلُوا الْيَتَامَى حَتَّى إِذَا بَلَغُوا النِّكَاحَ. That test them, test the orphans, test their intellect, test their level of intelligence, test their level of maturity, until they reach the age of marriage. So the scholars make an argument here that Allah says test their intellect before you give them their properties, the will, the properties from the will that is left to them. Before you hand it over to them, test their intellect. Continue to administer that to them to make sure that they are up to age or until they reach the age of marriage. Now, first of all, this verse means that there's an age of marriage. So it can't just be all girls can be married or all boys can be married. There's a certain age of marriage, and that age is the age of maturity. That is an age where they are old enough for you to hand over their properties to them. That's an age where you know that they have matured, that you can say they're matured enough to get married also. So they are linking maturity to marriage and saying, based on this verse, maturity has to come into play here. If you can say they have to be mature before you hand over their properties to them, then they have to be matured enough before you marry them off. That is the first argument that they have. The second argument for them is the fact that So if you say that it is permissible in Islam because the Prophet engaged in it, are you forgetting the fact that there are some things that are exclusive to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? An example of that is also the fact where the Prophet has the ability to marry more than 4 wives, while every other person is restricted to marrying a maximum of 4. These are called khususiyatun nabi. These are special grants given to the Prophet by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is only the Prophet that is allowed to do it. And their argument is also to say that it is only the Prophet that's allowed, the same way only the Prophet is allowed to marry more than 4 wives, it's the same way only the Prophet was given permission to marry a young girl child. Because when you say a girl child should only be married to someone who is capable, there is no man that can be capable of handling a girl child morally, financially, fundamentally, psychologically, and everything besides the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that is why it is a valid argument to say that only the Prophet is specifically given that ability to marry a girl child. But on the other hand, the people who say it's allowed also said, what about the Sahabas that did the practice? There's a record example, like we said, like Ali that gave his daughter Kulthum to Umar ibn al-Khattab, that's not the Prophet, and he did it and nobody opposed him in doing so. There are other records of other companions of the Prophet who did the same thing, and they did not accept this. Now, but for those, again, who make the argument that this is not allowed, the third reason is to say that, okay, let's look at it this way. The essence of marriage, the natural essence of marriage is the natural essence of marriage is for 2 people to come together and fulfill their sexual desires. And the religious aspect of marriage is for 2 people to come together and multiply. That is the religious objective of marriage. 2 people come together, multiply, increase your generation so that you can have generations after you that will continue to worship and praise Allah. But the natural tendency, the natural objective of marriage, primary objective of marriage is intercourse, to have intercourse between themselves. And they say that for a girl child or a boy child, they don't even know what intercourse is. So the main objective of marriage is already defeated. If you have a child getting married at a young age before they are matured. So that is their argument in this case. Some of them also make arguments to say that some of these marriages that you are administering before the children are of age can be voided by these children when they grow up. Imam Abu Hanifa, for example, in that mazhab of Hanafiya mazhab, their own point of view is to say that a girl child that was given out in marriage, first they agree that a girl child can be given out in marriage by the father or the grandfather or other men in the family. This school of thought agrees that the girl child can be married off at a young age by the father or the grandfather or the uncle or other men in the family. But when she grows up in that marriage, when she grows up and attains the age of maturity, she can decide to void that marriage. The other school of thoughts don't agree with this. Imam Maliki and the Maliki school and the Hanbali school both say that only the father has the right to marry the girl child off, and when she grows up, she cannot nullify that marriage. The Shafi'iyya school says that the father or the grandfather only can give the girl child out in marriage, and when she grows up, she cannot nullify such marriage. So this proponent of saying that this is not acceptable or permissible in Islam, they're going with the school of thought of Abu Hanifa to say that if you marry the girl child off at a young age, when she grows up, she's just going to nullify such marriage anyways. Why put her in that situation? Why not just let her grow up before you marry her off in any case? Now, having presented all these 3 cases, or 3 arguments, one other thing to note is the fact that generally we know that this practice is not something that everybody is doing to now constitute a problem or a nuisance. It is not general. Most parents don't even think about giving their girl child in marriage to begin with. So this is not something that Islam commands people to do. So when we hear arguments from people who are not Muslims or even Muslims who don't understand properly, making the argument as if this is a command by Islam and that Islam is such a primitive religion that allows the rights of girl children to be taken away, this is totally wrong. Again, like I said, this was a practice for Islam, and Islam has put checks and balances in it. Like saying that if you're marrying your girl child off, it has to be to someone who is capable. If you're marrying your girl child off, there has to be a very pressing need for you to do so. A need that will be lost if you have to wait for her to get to grow older before you do it. So it has to be totally necessary for you to engage in this practice. Now, again, saying that we know that people don't practice this generally, but some people still do it. We also know that it is basically not necessary to do this because, first of all, unless there's a pressing need to do it, you don't have to do it. In most places, in most countries, there is no pressing need to do this. It might have been the case in the past for people to have reasons to do it. Maybe one kingdom and another kingdom want to come together in marriage to avoid war. Or one rich family and another rich family, one noble family and another noble family want to come together to have continuity in their generation or something like that. Or things that are cogent, that might be cogent reason for them those years or those times or those generations that are no longer cogent reason at this time or in this generation. Okay? Now, having said that, when we also hear arguments about people who say, oh, your prophet is a pedophile, he married a girl, he consummated with her at nine years old. Those people, when you look at them, you just say to them that they are judging yesterday with today's standards. It is not until now that it became a thing to talk about the rights of girl children. It is not until now that it became a thing that marrying a girl child became something that you frown upon. This is a rule of society. This is something that society within itself has decided to frown upon at this time. Why? Because there's no more need for it. The society of the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ totally accepted this. How do we know that? Aisha radiallahu anha herself, the subject here, when she narrated this, when she narrated the ideas of how she married the Prophet at a young age of 6 and how the marriage was consummated at 9, there's no bitterness in such narration. When she narrates the day of the marriage, her state of mind, and the people around her, it shows clearly that she was totally accepting of that situation. The Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, whom she was being married to, was totally accepting of the situation. They were not being forced upon themselves. Our father, the one giving her out in marriage, was totally accepting of this. He was doing it of his own free will and of his daughter's free will. Also, the society at that time that they were living in was totally accepting of it. No one had any objections to this practice at that time because it was a normal practice. Another thing to note is the fact that when he married her at 6, there's no record that says he consummated with her at 6. Now, the question that we would ask ourselves is if he was a pedophile or he was doing it and it wasn't a practice at that time and he just did it because he could, why didn't they consummate at 6? Why didn't they consummate at 7? Why didn't they consummate at 8? Why 9? Why did they wait for her to be 9? Is that a magic number? Or could it be that she was matured enough at that time, at 9 years old, to consummate the marriage? And that's why they waited till that time to consummate that marriage. And that brings us to a very cogent question. Because again, this is a practice on the one hand that can be argued as acceptable in Islam. So when we see people practicing this, because we actually have people who practice this, and when they do practice it, they have their proof that they stand upon. If you find people who say they don't practice it, they have their proof that they stand upon. So both ways, when you see it as a Muslim, we're not the ones that go out to condemn or to forbid what is not forbidden by Islam. You can make an argument for why you will not do it, and you will be right to do so. You don't have to condemn those who do it. And personally, I think that the most mistake that we make is focusing on that which is not important and talking about that, focusing on that which is not important and missing that which is important. What is not important is trying to argue or defend that this is not accepted in Islam. You even have people, even scholars, who spend their time trying to discredit the ideas of Aisha, where she says that she married the Prophet at 6 years old and they consummated at 9. You have people trying to find excuses to say that hadith is not authentic, when indeed you know that it is authentic. You have people who are trying to say, no, it wasn't at 6, it was at 7. I even had someone, the last time I gave this lecture, I had someone say that they read an hadith where it was said, historians have said that Aisha did not marry at 7 or at 6, that she married at 14. And I said to him that, listen, if you're trying to make excuses because you're being challenged by people and you're trying to find a workaround to what is established, you will only be shooting yourself in the foot. Because these people you want to defend your religion to, these people you want to defend your religion to, these are the people who said that everyone has a right of choice. Everyone has a right to choose how they want to live. So much so that they believe that you can be born man and choose to be woman. They defend such people who want to change their gender so fervently. But they tell you that a woman cannot make a choice to use the hijab. They say you have a choice to do anything you like. You can change your gender, but you don't have a choice in deciding to use your hijab. They will shame you for that. They will take your right away from that. Are these people the ones that you trust? Because these ones want to take your religion. They don't care about what is right or wrong. So when they are attacking, yours is not to find defenses. Say it the way it is established, it is an established fact. Don't judge yesterday's standards by today's standards. Yes, you can say it is in the law today that this is not acceptable. And we agree with that, and everyone has to follow the law. But don't take that back centuries and then judge the practice of that time, which was acceptable, and which also protected the right of the girl child. Doesn't also agree that the girl child be molested or anything like that. Now, when I said that we are discussing what is not important and leaving that which is most important for us to discuss, is first accepting that this is a practice that Islam accepts, marrying of young people, a marriage of young people. However, what we should be discussing is, and which will protect the right of both male and female, the one that's being married off and the one they're marrying off, is that the main question is, what is the age of consummation? The age of marriage is not an argument. Islam permits it. That's fine. Islam permits marrying a child. But what does Islam permit in terms of consummation? At what age can a marriage be consummated between a man and a child, or a woman and a child? At what age? That is the main thing. That is where psychology comes in. That is where medicine comes in. That is where knowledge comes in. That is what we should argue. That if you marry a child and you consummate with them and you hurt them and you cause them diseases or things like that, now that is forbidden. Because the basic principle again of Sharia is la darar wa la dirar. No inflictions, no discomfort should come to anyone by your actions. Basic principle. So you cannot hurt a girl child, even someone who is adult. Anyways, what the scholars say about this restriction about when can the marriage be consummated? One school of thought says that the consummation can be an agreement between the father. Again, remember, a responsible father who has been given the ability to marry off his child based on a cogent reason that must exist at that time for him to want to do so. So they put it in the hands of the father to say, the father and the husband can come to an agreement as to a time that will be beneficial to the child, that would not hurt her, to have consummation. So they will both agree that even though you're marrying this child at 6 years old, you know that you cannot consummate with her yet until she's 12. They can both come to such agreements. In a case where they cannot agree, it is said that when the child asks, they have to leave the child to be 9 years old minimum. And then they involve her in that discussion if she's ready or not. Why the 9 years old minimum based on the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha? The third school of thought says that consummation should not be based on age. Consummation should be based on physiology and the readiness of the female to accept, to enjoy such acts. Again, because the basic fundamental objective of consummation or of marriage is for two people to have relations between themselves. So this third opinion is the strongest, that says that it should not be based on age, it should be based on the physiology of the female. That is, you might not be able to consummate until she is, you might not be able to consummate until she is 14 or 15 or 18, until her physiology allows it. If we're saying that today the rate of growth of our female does not allow consummation until they are 18, that is a valid argument. That is what we should be discussing. That is a discussion we should be having. Talking about what is best practices now, what age can a girl consummate to avoid all these medical conditions that we hear that females have, which is the major problem. Islam is not the problem. It is the application of the rules and the laws that have been laid out that is the problem. And so we have given all of these points of views and stuff. Our own stance is to say that unless this is totally necessary, this should not be practiced except for those who find it necessary. Another reason is to say that yesterday's generation needed this, and that's why they practiced this. And it wasn't even general. It wasn't done by everyone. It was only practiced in certain situations. Today's generation, we have no need for such. There's no need to practice it. And there's nothing in the Quran that says you have to practice it. There's nothing that says you must practice it. You only do it when it's absolutely necessary. And we don't find such necessity in today's society. However, there are some societies today where it might be necessary. We've had people ask questions about how they do it in the northern Nigeria and stuff. But my response to that is to say, the government of today has responsibilities. In situations where you don't have social welfare for people, there's high poverty. You create a necessity for people to want to explore this option. You find parents who are not able to take care of their children, marrying them off to men so that those men can take care of them. So the society should create a social net that would devoid this situation. Don't give room for the necessity to arise that people can explore, that people can exploit, to give us a reason for them to engage in this practice. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.
Now it's time for question and answers. Any questions?
I have a question about in the Quran. This Quran is "Oh my malaikata ya'lamun." Like that phrase could be in the Quran. I'm talking about marriage or something like that. So I just want to know, like, what exactly does that mean?
Say that again.
The phrase "Oh my malaikata ya'lamun" it says in the Quran, referring to like marriage and stuff. I have a question.
I check that out in the Quran. Would you bother to check it out?
The definition?
Yeah.
I mean, I checked this. Like, sounds like slave, but I want to understand it like more, like better.
So do you remember one of the full verse that mentions it? The full verse. Which surah? Try to remember one full verse.
In Surah Al-Mu'minun, it says, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ. It says, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ إِلَّا عَلَى أَزْوَاجِهِمْ أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُهُم فَإِنَّهُمْ
MashaAllah. See this question he asked in this verse that he just quoted. وَالْحَافِظُونَ فُرُوجَهُمْ إِلَّا عَلَى مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانِهِمْ. So when we say مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانِهِمْ, malaka means having power over or having control over. So when we say مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانِهِمْ, what your right hand has control over. This is your slaves. What you own. So women that are owned, and that's again the practice of those times acceptable and stuff until Islam came and reduced the access of people to slavery, and in fact released people from slavery, made it an act of ibadah to free people from slavery, just to reduce that practice. So when we say to your answer, to answer your question, you say what do you have control over, what do you have power over in the female sense, that is female that you own or you have control over. So that verse that you quoted is talking about men and women. And in fact, this is a verse that is quoted when people ask questions about masturbation. And Allah talks about this verse, and this is a proof that some of the scholars used to say masturbation is prohibited, is haram, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, it was when it was given the virtues of Muslims or of believers, and saying, وَالْحَافِظُونَ فُرُوجَهُمْ, those who will protect their private parts. حَافِظُونَ, protect or watch over. فُرُوجَهُمْ, their private parts. إِلَّا عَلَى أَزْوَاجِهِمْ, except over their wives or their husbands. They will use their private parts only with their husbands or wives. أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُهُمْ, or for those who they have control over, like their slave, male slaves or female slaves. Well, female slaves. Yeah. For those that their right hand possesses, right? That their right hand has capability over, that you have control over. But the meaning of those that your right hand possess are your slaves. Wallahu a'lam.
That's a very good question. Questions?
Yeah, question around prayers. My two questions. Prayers. What about the African? See, one original African.
No.
So one.
No.
Yes. Now, kejì ni tí a máa ń wẹ̀ mẹ́rin láyò ẹgbẹ́ ìfẹ́jẹ́ ìlẹ̀bíṣẹ́ gòsì is not spiritual. Mo fẹ́jẹ́ ìlẹ̀bíṣẹ́ tí mo lè mo ṣe pẹ̀lú ọba àti ẹ̀ kí kó fi ọkọ̀ pa ẹ̀mí tí mo lè ṣàlùwàlà bí mo ṣe wà ní títí jáde ọmọ pé so the question for me is sorry.
Barely on both counts. Right, he asked, the first question was, when you pray, when you go for sujood, is the nose part of the parts of the body that should touch the ground? There are 7 parts of the body that should touch the ground when you go on sujood. The forehead, the nose, the palms should be on the ground, spread and facing the Kaaba. The 2 knees, and then the toes. The toes should also be on the ground, facing, no? So, toe level. And again, the forehead and the nostril, because of the level that you hook on. And also when you gauge them with how your back should be, the position that you should be on. Inshallah, we'll have a session. I think we've had that like twice already. Inshallah, we can have that session again. If for nothing else, but for the children, inshallah. And the second question is about taking a bath. That right in the bath, can we also make wudu after we're done with the bath? So some people will make an argument to even say generally that in the bathroom you can make wudu there. But then to such people you say something like, you say things like, no, considering as different situations. So when you can look at there are different kinds of bathrooms. There are different kinds of bathrooms. Some bathrooms, you know, it's filth everywhere. In such a place, definitely you can make wudu there. When in bathrooms where it's like a palace already, and the filthy part of the bathroom, the toilet, is separated from the bath, and the bath is a clean place. Inshallah, after taking your bath, you can make wudu in the same bath, and Allah knows best.
Yeah, in addition to that question about faith, when you see somebody can go to ghusl janaba, and after that ghusl they can actually do salat. Wherever they did the ghusl, definitely.
Now, if it's okay to make janaba and use it for salat, so yeah, that's technical. Yes. Sure. Anyone online, if you have any questions? No, come on. We will chat.
Oh, any reason? Any reason? Yeah.
No. No. If there are no questions, now inshallah we'll move on.
Please now complete our question and answers. Is that okay? Okay. Okay. Donation is at the goal of the combined. The Jamaat does it alone. La ilaha illallah, Allah, Allah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, Al-Qur'an Kalamullah, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, Allah, Allah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, Al-Qur'an Kalamullah, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, Allah, Allah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, Al-Qur'an Kalamullah, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, Allah, Allah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, Al-Qur'an Kalamullah. That's Ibn Adillo. La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, Allah,